everyone. Welcome back to this episode of the Real People Podcast. We've been on a bit of a hiatus, but we are back and we are tackling the big issues today. I've got Lance and Mike here today. Mike and Lance are going to really teach me about the Second Amendment because I am just ignorant to it. So I've got two friends who are significantly more knowledgeable about it than I am. So we're going to talk to them. Let's say hi to them real quick. Lance, say hello. Tell us a little about yourself.
Hello, thank you, Dan, for having me on. I appreciate it. It's good to always have these conversations. My name's Lance. I spent 5 years in the military as part of a special response team under Operation Enduring Freedom. I've been stationed at some of the more secure installations in the world, so Guantanamo Bay being one of those, joint operations of the NSA. While I was in the military, I did a lot with firearms, obviously the M4, M16, M240 Bravo, M9. There's probably Spanish or a language people don't speak to those who don't know anything about firearms, but we'll get into that.
Perfect.
And a part of that, I've been a security professional for probably the past 15 years at this point.
Well, first and foremost, Lance, thank you for your service. It's a pleasure knowing you, and your experience is clearly you're a novice on the topic, Lance. So no,
Absolutely.
no, thank you, Lance, and thank you for your service and for jumping on today. Really appreciate it, Mike. Mike and I go back to high school to St. Joe's Metuchen. Mike, please say hello and tell us about yourself.
Hello, and thanks for having me on, Dan. I don't have a military background. I am very much ingrained into the gun culture, but more on the training side. I'm the owner and founder of Bulletin.net, which is a free event listing platform for trainers and students to connect with each other on firearms training, outdoors training, self-defense, all different types of educational opportunities that are related to those training communities. And that's from my background as both a student of the gun, as they say, for the past, 12 years or so, which then had me grow into, like any good martial art, the next kind of phase of any good student's path is usually to teach. So I started teaching about 3 years ago, holding classes, teaching things more on the outdoor side because I had a background in scouting as well. And then that really kind of helped me figure out hey, there needs to be an advocacy for connecting trainers with educators. And for all those different types of topics. But I saw how difficult it was to find good training as a student and how difficult it was to find students as a trainer. So I developed a company to help meet that need. And that has really been my kind of full-time activities the last, 6 months or so, is building that up to help, students and trainers connect.
So great. So we really we've got really great expertise on our panel today. Lance, who has truly professional career and really understands this truly better than most, and Mike on a civilian side who teaches and has a real love for the culture. I think we've got a really diverse and great panel today to teach me who doesn't really know much about anything. And that's a general prospect, not even just guns. So I think we can't talk about guns and gun culture without talking about the Second Amendment. And I think that's a big one. We're coming out of the gate strong.
Yeah.
So Mike, I'll start with you on this one. Can you just give us your basic interpretation of the Second Amendment,
Sure.
and how it fits in our American society and culture today?
Well, actually, there's one thing you said that actually really resonated with me. You're like, oh, I don't know anything about the Second Amendment, which is the beauty of it, is you don't have to, because the whole purpose of the Second Amendment is not to grant rights to people. My view of the Second Amendment, which is, I believe, consistent with the way that the Supreme Court has interpreted it with recent decisions, is that the Second Amendment is about limiting government. Back when the country was founded, the government the government at the time, England, had a kind of vested interest in disarming the populace because we were rebels, right? That's how we founded our country. So when we started our new country, our new government, this new experiment of democracy, we said, okay, we need to make sure that government never has the right to remove firearms or weapons in general, because it really applies to more than just a gun or a musket or whatever. It's we're stopping the government from having the means to remove our power to fight back against government. And I think that's as true today as it was back then. And the reason why we have such a stable, and I know it doesn't seem stable nowadays, but compared to other like countries out there, I think we do have a pretty stable form of government. And I think that is largely due to the fact that we as a people feel empowered to be able to stand up for our rights. And if you look through history of all these civilizations that have been disarmed, it's usually a really bad sign for what's to come. But B, it gives them no opportunity to then fight back and, self-govern. So I know this kind of falls into the kind of like, oh, it's the absolutist, like the conservative side of, and I'm not a conservative by any means. I very much dislike any kind of political labels, but in this instance, I do kind of fall into the conservative thought that, the Second Amendment, it's not about hunting. It's not about, it's not, it does cover self-defense because as humans, we have the right, the unalienable right to defend ourselves. But to me, the reason that amendment exists, the reason why it was codified and written down as the Second Amendment, just as important, like the second thing after freedom of personality and thought and speech, was because, hey, we need to ensure that people never lose that. And the only way to do that is to make sure that government never has the opportunity to take it away.
For sure, for sure, and that was great, Mike. And I think Mike's summing up Mike's point is we have this inalienable right
Yeah.
to defend ourselves, and simply nobody should take that away from that. I think, regardless of which side of the aisle you sit on, I think that's a pretty agreeable point that we can all get behind. Lance, do you want to expand? Do you want to? I've got a presume agreement. Do you want to expand on that of your own interpretation?
I saw some head
Sure.
nodding.
Yeah, no. So, Mike, I think that was a very good explanation of the Second Amendment and the founders' thoughts on why we had it, why that's put into the Bill of Rights. One thing that a lot of people seem to misunderstand, I think, about the Second Amendment, I won't touch on all the points Mike did because I think he did beautifully there, is the well-regulated militia aspect. A lot of people read that and they think, well, there needs to be well-regulated militia. That's something the government does. Yeah. So again, if you're looking back at, like Mike said, you're looking back at the foundation of the country. We were a rebel force fighting against the world's greatest military might on the planet at the time. The militia is the people. That's, to put it short and simple, that is the people. So if you look at the Second Amendment, it says, well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, those commas in that are very important. If you look at how things are written, and the founders were very meticulous with how they wrote every single aspect of the Constitution, and the Second Amendment is no different. They wrote this with the intent of saying that a well-regulated militia, yes, is necessary for the security of a free state. That's one idea. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed is a second idea. Now, they come together in the fact that a well-regulated militia is made up of the people. The people have to be able to keep and bear their arms, and the well-regulated militia means they're able to organize. Now, why doesn't that have to deal with government? Because the whole idea was during that time when this was written, because context is very important, especially in a situation like this, when that was written, it was done for the purpose of making sure that the people could organize themselves into a well-regulated militia in order to get back against tyrannical power. Again, a lot of people point to hunting, things like that. That's never mentioned at all. The Second Amendment ensures all of the others. As long as we have the Second Amendment, the others won't be taken away. As we've seen time and again in other countries, Venezuela, Cuba, China, Russia, the list goes on
Nazi
and on.
Germany.
Nazi Germany, another good one. The Holocaust in Nazi Germany, can you imagine if the Jewish people were armed?
Never
Might have
again.
been a completely different story.
One of my favorite memes, one of Jamie's uncles and subsequently my uncle shares is there's a picture of an Israeli jet and it says Israel not so easy to f with now, and it's just I think about that when people mention that.
Yeah,
So just I do want to move on to the next question, but
sure.
I'm thinking about um when you mentioned the militia part, and this is where I'm thinking about it is it made sense as in terms of as rebellious colonies, um, and you mentioned that the militia is the people today. Can you expand on that on how it kind of we're militia as people, and I understand that as a concept, but how does militia as a people in today's cultural norms how does that fit in?
So in today's cultural norms, it's a little different because we are not in the same circumstances we were in. Now, it is entirely possible, though I'll admit it, albeit a bit far-fetched for the government to suddenly decide to turn on the people. I mean, it's happened, but I would say at this moment in time, it's probably not that likely. However, security of a free state does not necessarily mean from external enemies or necessarily from government. Security of your person, of your property, of your life are all things that need to be maintained. And if a society comes together and does this as a whole, then it allows you to be more free, more secure in your person. It allows you to live life without fear. And that's something that's also put into the Constitution, albeit not as explicitly as a lot of the amendments have it. But these things allow us to be able to continue to live in this free state. Because freedom, as Thomas Jeff or Benjamin Franklin said, freedom is dangerous. It's not something that's meant to be safe. It's not something that's meant to be comfortable. It's something where if there's a trade-off, you pay a price for this freedom. Part of that price is you'd be willing to protect yourself, protect others, protect your community, and being willing to be offended, being willing to be upset, being willing to take on the consequences of your actions. All these things are parts of freedom.
And I could be completely bastardizing this quote, but I believe was it Franklin who said he who gives security for freedom deserves neither? Was that Franklin or okay
Yeah,
or was
it
it?
was.
Yeah.
I believe it's Franklin. He who gives up security he who gives up freedom for security deserves neither.
Mike, I'm glad you jumped in. Do you want to touch on just the militia as a
Yeah,
general American norm, or
of course. I think that the my takeaway from the idea of militia, and it gets thrown around as like a buzzword topic nowadays in terms of like, oh, a private organization that has guns and is paramilitary. Which, okay, that can be part of the idea of what a militia is. But to Lance's point, like the militia is everyone. Dan, you're the militia. I'm the militia. Like it's not the organized group that is the militia. It's the potential to form it. And without that potential to form it, we lose a critical aspect of security of any society. Um, I think the kind of thing that most people don't realize is like, you know, the federal government and even like say the National Guard, as much as we like to think that they're omnipotent and can do anything at any time to fight any threat anywhere, they're not. Um, I think just a small percentage of what is represented as the entire population of the country of like 300 something million, say it's 10,000 people. Like how many people are in the army? It's not a lot. So like if we ever faced a threat that was broad scale across the country, say multiple, invasion from multiple places, the militia is our ability to fight back in conjunction to the federal government as well. I think it was is it Hirohito or
You're,
um,
you're talking about Admiral Yamamoto.
Admiral Yamamoto? Thank you. He was I actually I heard somewhere that this he actually didn't say this, but I think it's such a great
It,
quote
it was a
anyway.
paraphrase. Yeah,
Yeah,
it was a paraphrase, but
it was a paraphrase. Um, you know, he believed that they could never invade America in World War II because he felt that there would be a rifle hiding behind every blade of grass, and that capability. Not the fact that every American was behind a blade of grass with a rifle. It's just the fact that we had the ability to become that. was enough to make him go, yeah, we really shouldn't invade.
Right, and
Um,
that's a pretty powerful deterrent. And even by today's standards, here we are, if my math serves me correctly, 60 plus 80, 80 years later. We've got obviously our weaponry, even as civilians, is significantly more sophisticated. So, I even today's standards, I'm sure, is significant deterrent. So no, that was great, gentlemen. Thank you for kind of breaking that down for me. We part of when I threw this together and I put this together, I put a general call out for anyone be willing, and thank you both for coming forward to be willing to offer your time and expertise on this. I noticed I had a lot of friends, and I don't think it's a secret that I'm, center left Democrat, and most of my network is. But when asked for, can I get some of those who are for the gun control side, I didn't really get a lot of takers. Um, so that was one of the big reasons why I wanted to do this is I wanted to help. Like, okay, whole part of this podcast is getting a little better understanding of perspectives and issues. Um, and I imagine that you both probably have. I presume you respect the gun control argument, but you have some holes that you'd like to address. Are any misconceptions in the concept of gun control that you feel like this is maybe noble in its ideals, but maybe it's not entirely grounded in fact? Do you have anything you'd like to share? Lance, I see you nodding, so I'm going to give this one to you.
Yeah, so I don't think your average person is, the extreme gun grabbing government tyranny type of individual. I don't think that's the case at all. The three arguments I probably hear the most. The first is if we ban guns, they will go away. The shootings will go away. That's the first argument I hear. The second is the Second Amendment. They didn't know about machine guns. That's the other one I hear, which is an interesting one. And the third that I hear the most is we need more laws to make sure that only people who are capable should have firearms. So those are the three biggest arguments I hear. In terms of, I want to start out with the second argument, which is the Second Amendment doesn't cover modern weaponry or modern
Right.
weapons of war.
As you were saying it, I was thinking it, so I would love for you to tackle that.
Yes. So there's a few things that you need to take into account when you're looking at that. The first is that the Constitution is a living document. It's meant to withstand the test of time. It's meant to adapt and change. And when they wrote it, the muskets were the military weapons of the time. The point is to have an equal footing with the tyrannical military you'd be going up against, which is why that as militaries and governments update their weaponry, so should the citizenry. Otherwise, it'd be a very one-sided fight if we were walking around with muskets and someone else had a belt-fed machine gun. But
and
regardless,
it's
they
beyond
actually
guns.
did. Sorry, what was that, Mike?
Oh, I sorry. I just want like it's beyond guns too. Like
Yes.
and I just this just instantly popped in my head. Like, look at these people fighting for their homeland in Ukraine. Like,
Hmm.
they aren't just using rifles. Like, they're using drones and dropping things from the sky. If the government said, "Oh, you can't have drones and you can't have the ability," like it has nothing to do with the particular weapon. It has to do with the capability of the people to fight.
Absolutely. And that's a big part of it. But again, we this is the only amendment we do that for. We don't demand that you don't have the freedom of speech on a podcast or on the internet. You can write, the only time you don't have freedom of speech is when you're yelling it outside or when you're writing it and sent it by a horseback carrier to deliver via mail, or printing a book only via printing press. This is the only amendment that seems to be held to that standard. But there also, to debunk that one last time, is there was the puckle gun, which created in the late 1600s, which was a crank fired, what could be considered the first machine gun. So they were well aware of this technology. The next argument was if we ban it, it'll go away. Now, this one I think is more driven from fear. And I can understand that. Fear can make us think crazy things. Fear can make us very fixated on a particular issue. but we found that banning things doesn't work. I mean, let's look at prohibition. How long did that last until alcohol started flowing into the country? People started having underground bars. Uh, the war on drugs in America. How's that? How's meth and marijuana and cocaine and all these other drugs doing? Still quite available. So the banning argument, it doesn't work. We've proven it again and again with many different things. You look like you have something to say there, Dan.
I do. I think those are two. Your first 2 points are outstanding, and I can totally see the merit. But can and I'm just using your third point, which I'm really thinking about, is can you talk about the capability? Because presuming we do go along with what you're saying, and okay, this makes sense. We have a military industrial complex that's significantly advanced weaponry. Therefore, the militia, the people, us, as we discussed, needs to keep up with that. And I think it's a fair point. Like the Second Amendment as a being so rigidly interpreted, where I think maybe the first gets there's a lot of debate around that and but I think it's fair to say the Second Amendment is very rigidly scrutinized, and I think that's a great point. But I think about your third point too about capability. I mean, these are quite literally, if you want to exaggerate a little bit, and for me being a little sensitive about it, in theory, these are weapons of considerable destruction. So I would be really curious to hear your point about capability.
So capability is something where to also to debunk another common myth, an AR-15 is not a weapon of war. You would probably last about 6 seconds on an actual battlefield with an AR-15. To give you an idea of what most people don't realize, an AR-15 fires a 5.56 millimeter round. Okay, your pistol, your average
In
pistol.
English for the for the
Oh, you
what
want
was
me
you
to
think
convert
that's
it
great?
to imperial?
Yes, I want. Give me that. I want it in meters. No.
Yeah.
Continue.
Well, it's already in millimeters now. So you got the 4.5 millimeter round, or 5.56, excuse me, 5.56 millimeter round. Your average pistol fires a 9 millimeter round. To give you an idea of the size. So your average pistol, that round is about twice as big, a little less than twice as big. So what an AR platform was designed for, and so the M4 and the M16 are derivatives of that platform, but they are absolutely not the same. So an AR-15 is a semi-automatic firearm, meaning one trigger pull, one bullet comes out. That's it. You release the trigger, it resets, you pull it again, fires another bullet. Our M4s and M16s, three settings. You have safe, single fire, and automatic, or you have safe, single fire, and burst, depending on the weapon configuration. The ability to fire fully automatic, the ability to fire a burst, and how that operates is what mainly differentiates the AR-15 from a military weapon. That's one of the main differentiations for that platform. However, the reason we adopted that platform was not for its lethality. It was for the ability to throw rounds downrange and provide covering fire for troops as they were advancing in Vietnam. So they never really was designed to be a really good weapon at causing casualties to the enemy. It was really meant to put a lot of rounds downrange. As the Army manual says, if you put enough lead downrange, eventually you'll hit your target. That's really what it was designed for. The average shot to hit ratio in Vietnam was actually 50,000 rounds to one. So every 50,000 bullets that were fired, they hit one person. And that is the official statistic. So not really a weapon of war. And we've had automatic weapons have been banned in this country for decades. You cannot buy them as a civilian. But
Well,
And,
I think
and still, and Mike, but still, I mean,
still,
again,
yeah,
complete ignorance.
still. You would need a Class 3 license, which is a very rigid and difficult to get license from the ATF in order to actually purchase a fully automatic weapon. And it is extremely hard and extremely prohibitive cost-wise to do so. I think the license itself is $20,000 to $30,000.
So obviously, kind of, paraphrasing your point, these weapons are not readily accessible. These military grade weapons. So that's a real misconception that we on the left seem to have, that at gun shows there's a conveyor belt where you just walk up to a belt and pick up your AR-15. So that's clearly, as you're suggesting, not the case. And that capability, is being exaggerated if I'm interpreting that correctly.
Much so.
Okay.
I can go into a whole thing on background checks and how rigid that is,
No,
but I don't want to I don't want to shut Mike out here and not give him a chance to talk. I see
no,
he's
no.
chomping at the bit
That's
there, so I want to
that's
give him a
great,
chance.
Mike. Mike, take it away. Jump in.
Yeah. Well, okay. So let's get controversial, right? This. You know, I will admit sometimes I have some extreme views. While I Lance, everything that you said is absolutely, you know, straight down the line of like, yes, it makes total logical sense that the AR-15 is not a weapon of war, like by definition, by logic, and all this other stuff. But let's get real. Like, this isn't a logical debate that we have nowadays. It's
True.
emotional.
Hmm.
And if you want, you know, I think that I should be able to have whatever. I think I should be able to have a machine gun. I think
Agreed.
everyone should be able to have one. I think I should be able to have a cannon if I can afford it, or, you know, all the way up to nuclear weapons, because humans have the right to be able to do that. They don't have the right to use it. That's where the debate really starts to kind of divert. Because what we wind up doing is, and this is kind of the crux of my misconception about gun control, is that we spend so much time arguing about what people should have the ability to have and what their capability should be, and we completely forget about like dissuading or stopping people from behaving how they shouldn't. And I know that's a nuance, but that is the kind of crux of most arguments when it comes to gun control, because, oh well, the easiest way to stop drunk driving is to eliminate cars. You know what I mean? Like, the easiest way to stop, um, you know, drug deaths is to lock people in their houses. Like, we can take away people's capability to make bad decisions and their capability to have the ability to harm others, but we're taking away their freedom. And
And
that is
Mike,
not that's not okay.
I think that's a brilliant point because that's something I grapple with is who am I to tell someone how to defend your home, defend your family? Who am I? It's not my right to tell you, what makes you feel like you've protected your family. Um, with that said, and this is the question that's sticking with me, is how do because obviously mandating is not, and that's definitely the theme I took from Lance, and then I'm taking from you. You can't mandate behavior. Um, how do we as a society encourage more responsible behavior?
I have one very easy to implement it's not a solution. It doesn't fix everything, but it'll show you my like the way I think about this. Because as a society, and forgive me for kind of picking on the liberal side for a second. I have some very liberal views on a lot of social issues, but on the gun debate, I get pretty heated because it's so in contrast to the core values of what liberalism is, and it really bothers me because
It's
I
actually very
grew up,
true.
yeah, I grew up kind of like identifying with the liberal mindset, even probably in high school age, identifying as like Democrat. Um, but they're all about freedom and expression and being able to, be who you are, unless it's this. And that in that case, it's so extremely the opposite because it falls back onto the idea of control and government is responsible. Like if I don't agree with it, and this is their whole argument against the Republican side of it, is that uh, Republicans dictate morality, right? Because, oh, they don't like things and they're going to make government get rid of it. It's the same thing on the Democrat side. Oh, we don't like guns, so we want government to get rid of it. Like the will of the people should that like our will should win, and like the government should enforce our will on everyone who doesn't agree with it. It's so crazy to me. But, and I'm sorry, I'm getting back around to my main point here, is that government isn't responsible for this. Like we are. We should be the ones taking the onus on making sure that guns don't get in the hands of people that shouldn't have them. So, but that needs to be taken on the individual ownership level, not on the societal level. And like this type of approach can be expanded in multiple different ways, but here's something that nobody ever recommends. How about you open up the instant background check system, the NICS system for when you purchase a firearm, to every individual person to be able to use it? So that when I sell a firearm to somebody, which I can't do anymore, I think, as of like a week ago in Pennsylvania, I couldn't do at some point in New Jersey, because everyone says private gun sales, those are bad because you can't do a background check. Well, they say, well, it needs to go through a federal firearms dealer, which is regulated by the government, which is controlled by, you know, the big gov. Well, why don't we empower people to be able to behave better? Why don't we allow people to be able to have to do their own background checks? Me as a private citizen, if you gave me the free opportunity to like check with a criminal background check system, a mental health system before selling somebody a firearm, yeah, I would use that every single time. But
Uh,
that's never the option. It's always no. We just need to remove them. We need to remove his ability as a private citizen, the ability to control their own property, which
and,
is
and just for questioning's sake, like who maintains that database?
well, the government does, but they're the only ones that really can because they like pull together all of this data across the country, across states. And I can go on my own tirade about the criminal justice system and how that's pretty BS sometimes, but it's a data point. It's something that we can use as a tool to see like who has or who has not been like working within the bounds of society. So like if somebody who's committed a felony, is on that system, that's who you shouldn't sell guns to. But I don't have that ability to do that. Instead, they remove my ability to actually sell my own property.
So
That's
that's a very interesting idea, Mike, and it's something that I think, like you said, it's part of a solution. I think the other part comes into looking at how we've changed as a society and trying to help those who need the help. And what I mean by that is with COVID lockdowns, with war in Ukraine, with the last, I'd say probably decade, there's been a sharp decline in the mental health aspect of a lot of the
For
citizens
sure,
of the U.S.
for sure.
And I had done some research because I thought about it for a while of applying to a clinical psychology program. Uh, Once I'd finished my master's degrees, I decided I wanted to look into that. And the amount of schools that are available and the class sizes and how many psychologists are actually being put out into the society is nowhere near to support the type of the population we have. And so I think Mike's right. I think there needs to be the ability of the individual to make that determination on an individual level per sale, whether that should occur. Because again, freedom is also the freedom of not agreeing to sell you that piece of property. That comes down to that as well. But on the other hand, we also need to look at the deeper societal issues because if people really wanted to stop a lot of these mass shootings and things that are happening, it's not the firearm. We've seen what happens. You can remove the tool, but someone who wants to do something is going to find a way. I remember a very gruesome story in the UK where an individual had decapitated someone with a machete in broad daylight in the middle of the street. Like if someone has that mindset and they're radicalized to violence to that point, they're going to find a way to do it, whether it be a homemade explosive or a knife, a machete, whatever it may be. A car, as we saw, is another weapon that we've seen a few times here in the U.S. Or I remember the Boston Marathon bombing was another big example. But so I think by combining the ability to help those who need it and giving us the tools necessary to make informed decisions regarding firearm sales would really step up the solution on top of providing the same security for schools that we do for politicians, banks, and ballparks.
Right. I mean, definitely, hardening has definitely been a big topic. Um,
sorry, I don't mean to
no,
step
no,
on
good.
Dan, but there's one key aspect in here too that needs to be brought into the discussion, and that is the media side of it.
Yes.
Um, like, there is no doubt that there is a mental health crisis in this country, and an uptick,
Without question.
yeah, without question, and an uptick in mass shootings, school shootings. Um, However, I would probably debate that the uptick is in what's the right word, in people per capita or in incidents per capita does not go up nearly as much as what we think it does based off of the rhetoric and the
Mhm.
media coverage that happens of it on all of these big news networks, which are just trying to fill time. And then that the real crazy part about it is that that compounds the mental health aspect, because what we wind up seeing is this vicious cycle of copycatism, where these like mass shooters, active shooters, whatever, they're looking for the next score, like the thing to bump them
One up.
up. Like,
Right.
and they there's been a ton of people that have kind of identified these horrific and terrible people as identifying as like this group, and they're like, oh well, maybe I can get a higher score than these others. But like, if they weren't amped up, if they didn't become the national news story to because let's face it, they get wind up being used as political fodder to try and advance agendas and to really kind of sell advertising. Like, it's they get hyped up for all the wrong reasons. Um and that just compounds it, and it's just this vicious cycle, and we've seen it since Columbine, just getting worse and worse. And it's not to say that it's faster and faster and there's more and more. It's just that they become you know center screen
Sensationalized.
every time.
Right. I mean, I think you both made great points. I think it's a nasty, vicious cycle of ad revenue, mental health decline, and I think just accessibility does play into it. But I think no, kind of going back to one of our first topics is, what other amendment is so, at least by today's contemporary standards, is so intrinsically tied to mental health. You don't really hear, you know, uh, even the free speech argument. No one seems to be bringing up mental health being a synonymous topic as with the Second Amendment, and essentially the right to defend yourself.
I
Um,
would say a lot of them do. I mean, just at first pass, Dan, like the ability, the freedom to be who you are is protected. So even if you're crazy, like I lump all Nazis, like people who follow like Nazism and white supremacy, into, they're just fucking crazy. Like, and but they have the right to be.
right,
So we protect that. Everyone, like, your mental health records have the ability to be, it's your privacy. So like all of those amendments still have bearing on mental health, like, and it's
sure,
pervasive across the entire culture, not just this one part of it.
right. No, and then that's a great point, Mike. And thank you for kind of pointing that out. I agree after thinking about what you said. Um, what can we all do? I mean, not just gun owners, and I don't want to make like I know we have one or two more questions, but like, what can we all do to improve mental health? I mean, guns seem to be and kind of what my original point seemed to be so synonymous with, well, he was a mass shooter because of poor mental health, but like, what can we all do and this is, I mean, if the three of us could solve this, you and I, we'd be billionaires, but to improve mental health.
Well, I'm out of my depth when it comes to how to solve mental health,
Appreciate that.
other than we like recognition and support and people being open to it, and empathy. I think goes a long way in all of it. And I think that's lacking on a lot of, on both sides of the wall. Like,
Without question.
so I think being a more empathetic and supportive culture, how we do that, I have no idea. But
Right.
I think that's number one. But I think in your tied into your question is not only what can we do in terms of mental health, but how do we also protect ourselves from that? Like, that's the flip side of the coin. Yes, we need to help people that have mental health issues, but, and I think this is where a lot of people get hung up, is like, we also need to take personal responsibility for our own safety, for our community's safety, for our children's safety, for our own safety. And that's where people just usually go, no, like that's not my problem. Like the police take care of that, or the school should be taking care of that, or the armed guard, or like this, like I don't like that's not for, I shouldn't be protecting myself. But I think we need to embrace that because I think that combined with being more like compassionate to people is the two pronged approach to making it a better society and making us safer.
And that's a really interesting point. And I think about this a lot. And Lance, I do want to get your thoughts in a second. Yeah, I think about just, I mean, I really think, and I hate to say this because please like, subscribe, and share this podcast. But I think about like social media, and I think about myself. I've been guilty. Like I've said terrible things to strangers online. I've been an awful human being. And I think about like, would I ever say this to someone in person if there were actual repercussions? No, I wouldn't. I at least have this concept of myself as a kind person, and I have said some god awful things,
You
mean
hit the nail on
things.
the head, Dan. That's it.
Yeah,
Is because there's
but
no
please,
repercussion.
like, subscribe, and share the podcast. Um, but so I think, and obviously regulation isn't the answer because that's been a huge part of the crux of what we're talking about is regulation simply doesn't work. But how do we, and I don't expect us to answer this. How do we encourage each other to be empathetic, like Mike was saying? How do we make the internet just a more positive space? I mean, I'd love to figure that out. Lance, I took away from your time. I'd love to get your thoughts.
No, no worries. Yeah, like Mike said, I'm by no means an expert on how to make the world, a better place and how to make it unified and everything's sunshine and bunnies every day of the week. But
That place would be awesome.
right. But opinion wise, I would say it starts with dialing back the dependence on social media. Social media is very much a serotonin cycle. So you post, you get reactions that feeds the cycle. It keeps going and going and going. The more you do it, the more you need it. It's an addiction. It really is. It's an addiction like drugs, like alcohol, like anything, uh, gambling. Social media is the same type of addiction.
I heard
And what it
something
does.
really profound I
Mhm.
was talking to somebody who kind of dabbles in psychology, and they said that looking at your phone is a trigger that you do when you're sad. I was like,
Mhm.
shit. Like, um, so yes, I think you hit a great point with the serotonin and triggers and reactionary, and I know that sometimes as men we like to like, oh, triggers, it makes you sound soft, but we think it's a real conversation we need to have. If we're going to be serious about mental health, we really have to talk about things that trigger us, things that upset us, not being a complete douche like myself in public, being accountable for things we say and do. So no, absolutely. Both Lance, Mike, great points. I want to move on to the next question.
Mhm.
So, talk about just gun culture and assault rifle culture. And Lance, you correct me a little bit on this. I understand that assault rifle culture has changed pretty significantly in the last 20 to 30 years. I think I saw this on, maybe it was John Stewart, maybe it wasn't. I'm trying to remember who I saw it on. That basically owning an AR-15, and again, this is complete ignorance. That was something that people thought you were out of the norm, and now it's very common. Is that true? False? Completely off? And why?
So I'll start off since I did criticize the question when you asked it at first. So assault rifle is a misnomer. Such a thing does not exist. Assault is a verb. It's something you do. It's an action you take. Uh, what AR actually stands for, which a lot of people don't know, is Armalite rifle, which was actually the original manufacturer of the platform. In terms of assault rifle culture changing, it's been one of the most common firearms in America for quite some time, the AR platform, simply because it's reliable, it's easy to customize to best fit you. It's got a decent caliber, what we call varmint hunting caliber. It's good for small animals. You couldn't hunt a deer with it, it's too small. Uh, I wouldn't really say I've noticed any kind of change specifically in AR culture, we'll call it. But it's something where I can understand where, to Mike's point, the news bringing it more to prominence makes it seem like it's more common now than it was before. I don't think there really is any statistical information to back that up. However, I can see how with every station, if there's a mass shooting and it does involve any type of rifle, it's automatically labeled an AR, and it'll be covered 12 different times in 12 different ways by all the different news stations regarding the same exact incident. So I can see from that aspect it seeming like there's a lot more, especially with more scrutiny on that particular platform. In terms of it actually being more, though, I haven't seen anything that would suggest it's more common now than it was before.
And I have a follow up question to that, but I want to get Mike's thoughts too on changing culture before I ask the follow up question because it's kind of for both of you. But go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, as far as AR, like the funny part is until you asked the question, I had never seen those words used together before like AR culture. I've seen gun culture a lot, Second Amendment culture, military, like I've seen AR culture. And where I see it fitting within culture has changed, I guess. And to Lance's very good point, it's because it's the hot topic, like it's a buzzword, right? It's kind to me looking at that. I try not to be so dismissive of like people's like opinions on the subject, but like being so familiar with it, it is it is so like not an issue when you actually become familiar with guns. It's like saying Honda Civics are car accident culture because they're just getting more accidents every day because there's a million of them on the road. So like it's easy for me to dismiss it as like, well, yeah, of course, like it comes up more because they're everywhere. They're mass produced. To Lance's point, they're easy to customize and stuff. Um, but at the end of the day, it depends on what culture you're in, and then that yes, there's things that change. Like in my circles, you're weird if you don't have one. Like, like,
Sure.
and like I hang out with people where we go to places, people's houses, we go training together, we show up places, and like it's not uncommon at all to like throw the rifle in the passenger seat or the footwell of the car. Because to me, it's second nature that thing enhances my capability in keeping myself, my friends, and my family safe. But I totally understand on the flip side of that, like it could be it's a trigger, for people unfamiliar with it because
Sure.
it's so different, right? It's not a handgun. It doesn't look like a wood stocked rifle. It's like emotionally, and I know I kind of harp on this side of it, like emotionally, it's an easy get. Um,
And I think that's fair. And I think about concealed carry, and depending on the day of the week, like, if you ask me about concealed carry, I think, my first instinct is like what you said, Mike. Like, if I saw somebody with a weapon of that of a high ca- caliber, forgive me if I'm completely misnaming it. So if I saw essentially an AR-15, just because if I'm gonna keep going down the wrong path, might as well use the wrong terminology. If I saw it in public, I would be scared. So I was talking about concealed carry, and the point I'll just give you a spoiler. The point I was going to make is, my first instinct, not knowing anything about guns, I'm like, I feel genuinely threatened. I feel this But if I'm thinking about this, like I think about there was I think there's somebody in Texas where someone brought a gun into a church in Texas, and literally 90% of the parishioners there were carrying, and that mass shooting ended very, very quickly. If it even was a mass shooting, I'll see
well,
if I
it
can find the
wasn't.
link.
It was a
Exactly,
it was a
exactly. You
single
can't even
shooting at
classify
that.
it.
Yeah.
Right. So I just want I'm going to touch on like that. That is my struggle. Like, and then I'll let you two jump on that point. So I'll give it a quick cough, shoulder crack, drink a little water. Yep, good.
Yeah,
I heard that, Lance. Damn, that was
I
good.
needed it.
All right. Yeah.
So so Dan, I
Okay.
think where you netted out with the question was if you saw somebody with an AR-15 walking around town.
Perfect memory, Mike. Thank you.
Right.
So if I saw someone walking around town with an AR-15, and my first instinct, I would feel threatened. I see that. I don't know anything about guns. I see someone, I don't know what his intentions are. This person could be a threat to me, my people I love, people around me who I don't know. Um, my ignorance is quite literally like using the words triggering me to be afraid and feel threatened. On the flip side, I think about stories I've read where, there's been stories where, it quite literally the good guy with the gun on many occasions has saved countless lives. I think about this there was a potential shooting in Texas where someone brought a gun into a church and unbeknownst to the potential shooter, 99% of the parishioners there were carrying, and that ended very quickly and not in the potential shooter's favor. Um, I kind of laugh because I think about the old ladies packing, and it makes me laugh every time, even though it's not a funny topic. But so I struggle with that, and I think about that, and I imagine you both have your thoughts on carried or concealed carry, because I really do see the pros and cons with it. Mike, I'll let you jump on that.
Yeah, well, if you look at my social media profiles and my whole business, it's very much centered around like empowering people and especially advocating for concealed carry. As a matter of fact, I moved out of New Jersey because I couldn't, and now you can, and I got my New Jersey carry permit and stuff. Um, but to come back around to your point of if I was walking down the street and I saw somebody with an AR-15, I would also be alarmed by that, only because that behavior is not the norm. His capability, but here's where you know, the people who get scared by that, because I wouldn't classify myself as being afraid or triggered or threatened by it, but it would garner my attention because it's not normal behavior. Because, and here's the part that most people don't realize: him walking down the street and me walking down the street, I'm a good person, I try to live my life morally and all this other stuff, we both have the same capability, we could both harm the same number of people at any one time. He's just doing it in a way that brings attention to himself, which is not standard behavior. So it would definitely raise my attention as well. But here's the thing: what is he doing with it? Like in your scenario, that guy walking down the street, what's he doing with it?
In a lot of situations, at least from what I've seen on the news, nothing. I remember watching a video once. I remember a cop stopped him. He checked to see if like the safety was on. He checked the magazine to see if it was within regulation. Cop looked at it and said, "Okay."
So there's this whole like open carry culture thing, which I don't agree with. I think it's stupid. And it's meant to be inflammatory, but I understand what they're doing because it's a form of protest. But where most people don't look like there's the first order effect of like, oh my God, there's a guy with a gun, but they're not looking past that to go, what is he doing with it? Because like we see police walk around with guns all the time. Most people that you see in states that allow for concealed carry, while it may not be a super high number, there's plenty of people around that are concealed carrying that have firearms with them. So my question, or the thing that I don't think people are doing enough is actually assessing the behavior of what that guy is doing. Is he actually threatening somebody, or are you scared of his capability? In which case, and this is where I get a little bit not so empathetic, you need to get over that. Like, that's like, that is your perception. And your perception, and I know we live in a culture nowadays where perception outweighs reality, especially in business culture. And I could go on a tangent about that for for hours. But that's something we need to address. Like something we need to like just because I feel something doesn't make it real. It doesn't. Like, and I know, with being empathetic, part of that is understanding that about people is like, hey, I need to understand, and I feel for you, and I recognize that you feel fear from this, and that could be caused by any type of thing, generational trauma. It could be from bad things that happen to you in life, and I recognize that. However, just because that you feel like he shouldn't have it doesn't mean that he shouldn't. It doesn't. So, I mean, I know we kind of got on a tangent there, but like that particular scenario is something that like I think most people aren't going to the next level. Like they're immediately reacting to what they see and what they feel, and not rationalizing and going, "Is he dangerous?" And the answer is no, because they're not threatening anybody.
Lance, do you want to touch on
Yeah,
and
so I
expand?
think Mike, again, spot on. I think a lot of people don't judge the behavior in the totality of the circumstances. They just look at the initial, this person has a rifle, this person has whatever it may be they're carrying. They're dangerous. It causes fear. Uh, again, to Mike's point, I agree. I don't think open carry is very useful at all. Uh, the first thing, if your goal is self-defense and defense of others, I know as an active shooter, the first thing they're going to look for is the guy with the gun. Take him out first. If they can identify you before you identify them, there goes your advantage. But again, it depends on like I said, the totality of the circumstances. You need to look at this person and say, what are they doing with this rifle? Are they brandishing it? Are they pointing it at you? Are they acting in a way that's unsafe? It may not even be malicious. There's a saying, don't attribute to malice what you can attribute to incompetence. And trust me, there's a lot of, and I'm sure one thing I forgot to mention in the beginning is I also down here in North Carolina, I help teach a concealed carry course for people to get their permit and their licensing here, and most people don't mean to be a danger to others. That's which is a whole other piece with training and everything like that, but it matters what they're doing with it. Like Mike said, my military training would say, okay, keep an eye on that person, keep them in my line of sight, don't turn my back on them. But I'm not going to necessarily say, okay, they can't do that. It's just, all right, I'm going to make a mental note you're there. I'm going to keep an eye on you, make sure I'm not putting myself in a vulnerable situation. But at the same time, they could be completely harmless, not a threat. It all depends on what actions they're taking. A perfect example, one of the things we had to go by is called the deadly force triangle: capability, opportunity, and intent. Those are the three things that determine whether or not lethal force can be employed. Uh, so capability is, do they have the person to do they have the ability to inflict death or serious bodily harm on you or someone else. Opportunity, are they within effective range of that tool? And then intent, are they doing something? The intent obviously being the hardest to prove because it's a thought process. Are they looking to cause harm or death to an individual? And that could be shown through pointing the weapon at you or making a verbal threat or charging you, whatever it may be. But as long as they're not doing these things, they are not a threat to you. And that's really what the point is. You need to take into account the totality of circumstances.
And it's funny, that you both mentioned that, and because I think about open carry, and I don't think I'm in favor of open carry. I agree with you. I think it's more attention seeking. I could certainly be persuaded to be in favor of concealed carry. I could see certainly a need for that. And I think about what we all spoke about with media coverage, and I think first thing I think about, I'm sure a lot of people on my side of the aisle think about when they think about open carry. The first thing they go to coverage wise is they think about Kyle Rittenhouse. And I actually think they got the verdict in that trial right. Um, and I hope I don't get flack for saying I think they got the verdict right. But I also think about how he went to a situation where in my opinion, he was antagonistic. Did he have the right to defend himself? Sure. I believe he did defend. He was defending himself. But I think especially in that instance, and I imagine, if you ask like every Democrat, like, hey, what's the first thing you think of when you think of someone open carrying? I think they're going to go to that
Well,
image.
Dan, if we could
Um,
turn the script on
I
you
don't know.
for a minute, because I know Mike's probably thinking the same exact thing.
Yeah,
Why why would you consider
hit
him
me.
antagonistic and not right for him to be there, but the other people did have the right to be there and they were not antagonistic?
Oh, they were 100% antagonistic, but there was a police force there to maintain the peace. Am I correct or
Well,
incorrect on that?
physically
Well,
there.
coming back full circle,
Whatever response starts with well, I'm like, oh crap.
um, let's look at some of the discussion that we had earlier. I think the little known secret about like policing and military use is that if the numbers get large enough, they don't have the ability to actually impose the will that they wish to impose. That's how riots happen. If police had omnipotent power, we would never have a riot ever. It's just the nature of it. Like the force of people gets too big.
Right. Truly draconian state. Right. I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
like
Sure.
it's impossible to enforce. That's what we saw. We like and this is why like first off, let me just caveat this with they're all idiots. Kyle Rittenhouse is an idiot. The three guys that tried attacking were idiots. Everybody
Yes.
out lighting
It
fireworks were
was.
idiots. They all should have never
It was a
done that.
perfect storm of idiots. I totally
Yeah.
agree.
So, and this is where my opinion comes from. All of the idiocy cancels out because nobody went there. Like you can't be like, well, he was a bigger idiot than this other idiot. Like, no, they were all doing stupid things with stupid people and going stupid places. You don't do any of those. So when we put them on the even playing field and they're all idiots, then you have to start looking at the actions that were present. And at the end of the day, he wasn't breaking any laws by being there with the capability to protect himself. So when they decided, hey, I'm going to kill this guy, he said, no, you're not. And he proved that he had the capability to protect himself. So, I think like too many people get caught in this like in this kind of debate or this battle between like, oh, he's either a hero or he's the worst piece of shit ever to exist in the history of whatever state, Wisconsin,
In the history of shit.
in the history of shit. And no, there's plenty of room in the middle to like throw stones at all of it. So they were all wrong, but at the end of the day, he was the only one that like acted in it. Like he had to do that. Like
Right.
he didn't
Right.
have to be there, but neither did they.
Yeah.
So
I think that's a fair point.
like if he didn't do what he did, he'd be dead.
A skateboard to the head. It would produce the same result as being shot.
I agree. As a matter of fact, I would rather be shot than bludgeoned in the head
Actually,
with a
it's funny.
skateboard.
A week
I
earlier,
could,
well, not
I
really funny, but a week earlier, someone was killed by a skateboard to the head in, I believe, California. But Mike, thank you for putting so eloquently what I was getting at with my question is why one side is viewed as it's an extreme. That's why what makes you think this person belongs there any more than this person? Because people are like, oh, he had no right to be there, or they'll say he had right to be there, the rioters didn't. It's like, well, to Mike's point, they were all it was the perfect storm of stupidity flying into
Oh,
and
for sure. No,
and
it
what
was
I think he was doing in it, like when you look at like what was the core purpose of him being there, like what was his intent?
right.
At
Right.
the end of the day, he
On,
was
on Lance's point, both sides.
yeah, he was trying to go help people. Like he was like, oh, there's businesses that, and you could probably debate that he wasn't really maybe doing that. He was going to belong and be part of a community of people that also do that type of thing, which I trust me, I understand that because I'm part of that type of thing. But his goal as part of that community, as part of what his purpose was of going there was to protect, bring stability, offer aid, and all these other things that it's like what shouldn't we be applauding that? Like he went to go render aid to a town in crisis, whereas like the town itself was like trying to burn itself down. So like holding him more accountable than the ones that were trying to induce harm and destruction is crazy.
I think those are fair points. For me, and I'm the one that went down this rabbit hole because we were talking about open carry. Like that was the first thing I think of open carry, and I think I immediately go to the result. But I think to both of your points, there's a lot more nuance than just how I went from A to B. There's a lot of A1, A2, A3 before we get to B. So I think no, I appreciate that. Thank you, gentlemen, for that. We have been talked about a lot. I really appreciate both Lance and Mike's time. Um, I hope everyone took something out of this. If you were like me and knew nothing, I hope you know something now. I hope that you're willing to do your research. I would, if Mike and Lance, and I imagine they are willing to leave their contact information. If you have questions, they're both super willing to answer those questions and to help us, learn more about these topics. So I'm gonna close us out, but I want to give Lance and Mike a last word to anything you want to take us home on. Lance,
Yeah,
take us home.
the one thing I would recommend above anything else is if you have questions or you don't understand, go to a range, take a course, learn about these things, explore it for yourself. Don't get your opinion based on just third-party accounts. Go to a range, learn about how seriously they take firearm safety, learn how they actually function, what their capabilities actually are, and I think you'll find yourself pleasantly surprised at the information you receive.
Well, I couldn't agree more, Lance. Knowledge is power, and diversify your knowledge. Get it from more than one source. And if you're not sure, ask Lance. Mike, what would you like to take us home on?
It's the same point. However, my whole life is devoted to trying to get people that training that they should experience. So, um, shameless plug. Like, if you are
What?
looking and want to be
What?
exposed more and are willing to kind of be introduced to that firearms world, please come to bulletin.net, bulletn.net.
We'll share it in the link. We'll share it in the description so everyone
Thanks.
can visit. Yeah.
That is there's a list of training classes around the country. I have probably half the states of the country, I think, right now have some classes in them, and you can search by location, how close it is to you, what topics you're looking for. So it's a free resource for students out there. And I have a bunch of other things like Facebook community and a YouTube channel where you can learn some more stuff. So please use me as a resource for anybody out there who is looking to find out more. I'm more than happy to do that. This is what I love to do, is to help introduce people to the firearms training community. So if you're looking for it, please call me, text me, whatever. I'm happy to be a resource for anybody.
Awesome. I want to thank Mike and Lance. You were great guests. We talked about a lot, and maybe we could do a follow-up episode to this.
Absolutely.
I'd
I
love
mean,
to. I'd love to debate somebody, like, actually talk to somebody and hear from them on the gun control side, because I'm curious to see what some of those,
Yeah,
like,
we can't debunk. We
Yeah.
can't debunk, or not really debunk. It's not the right word, but we can't assuage fears, and we can't educate unless we know where the misconceptions lie. And I think Mike's right.
I mean, you're basically punching down with me, so well, this is it's not a fair fight because bring it bring I got no good jokes. Mike and Lance, thank you both so much. This has been great. This has been the Real People podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. Learn something. And if you didn't agree, or if you don't agree, I hope that you at least heard what Mike and Lance had to say. That's the whole point of this podcast. Thanks so much, everyone. We'll catch you next time.